Welcome to this week's Parsha Share this week on Parshat Vayikra. We're actually going to deal this week not just with Parshat Vayikra, but with the whole book of Vayikra, Sefer Vayikra, which deals essentially with Korbanot, which deals with Korbanos, the sacrifices that were brought, the ritual sacrifices that were brought during the time, about 1500 years, when the Jewish nation had a Beis HaMikdash. It started off with a Mishkan, and eventually there was a Beis HaMikdash in Yerushalayim. There was a brief period, about 70 years, when there was no Beis HaMikdash in Yerushalayim, but then there was a Beis HaMikdash again. Eventually it was destroyed, and we've had roughly 2,000 years of Golus, of exile, when we don't bring Korbanos. We're going to be dealing with those issues today, because Korbanos, ritual sacrifice, where we take animals, we kill them for the service of God, that is something which is, it's not unique to Judaism, but it's unique in the sense that Judaism is the only live, active religion today which still celebrates this concept, which still considers this idea as something which is a relevant idea in terms of the service of God. And we have to understand that. I'm not going to get into the debate right now. I'm not yet getting into the debate of whether, when the third Beis HaMikdash is established, we're going to have Korbanos. That's a subject for discussion. Perhaps it will come up as we discuss some of the concepts that are going to be relevant to today's share. But ultimately, what I want to talk about is how we deal with Korbanos. And we know from tradition that Sefer Vayikra is the first. Is in fact the first book of the Torah that we teach, and ultimately it may not necessarily be true, but in tradition the idea is that we teach the youngest children the book of Vayikra. We want to educate them in the ways of our faith, and our faith believes in sacrifice, and even though we don't have any practical application for the laws that are contained in Vayikra and Leviticus, nevertheless the ideas behind them are crucial components of what it means to be a Jew. Of course, over the past month, 2 months, 3 months, we've been looking at Mikdash Halevi. We're going to be looking at Parshat Vayikra through the eyes of Mikdash Halevi, the sefer written by my grandfather, Rabbi Yosef Tzvi Rabbi Dunner, Zecher Tzadik Livrocha. Let's begin. Daber el b'nei Yisrael v'amarta aleim. Speak to the Jewish nation, say to them, Odom ki yakriv mikem korban Hashem. A man from among you, when he brings a sacrifice to God, min ha-behema, from animals, min ha-bokar, from cows, min ha-tzoin, from sheep, takrivu es korbanchem, you should bring close, takrivu, you should offer up your sacrifice. Says Rashi, Perish Rashi, Odom ki yakriv mikem, keshe yakriv. When a person brings a korban, but korbanos nedova diber ha'inyan. So the fact is, says Rashi, the very first korban that is addressed in Parshas Vayikra is what's known as a korban nedova. What is a korban nedova? Do you know what a korban nedova is? It's a korban that you bring of your own volition. It's not a korban that you are mandated to bring. It's not a korban which you need to bring. It's a korban which you want to bring. So we're going to see how the Mikdash Halevi is going to fold this in to the ideas behind what it means to be a person of faith. Moitzim onu, says the Mikdash Halevi. We find in this ki Parshas Vayikra ha'osekes b'ilchos hakorbanos. In the Parsha, in this portion of Vayikra that deals essentially with the ideas and with the laws of sacrifices, eino peiseches bekorban chayva or bekorban tzibur. It doesn't begin its deliberations, its discussions about korbanos with what's known as a korban chayva, a mandated korban, nor does it begin with a communal korban. What is a communal korban? I'll give you an idea what a communal korban is. It's a korban tomid. Every single day, at the beginning of the day in the Beis HaMikdash, the very first korban was a korban tomid, and the last korban of the day was a korban tomid. What's a korban chayva? The korban chayva is It's a mandated sacrifice. If you sin, you must bring a sacrifice as part of your penitence, as part of your penance for that sin. So you have communal korbanos, which are not individual, they are on behalf of everybody, on behalf of all the Jewish people. And you have a korban, which is a chayv, which is an obligation, it's mandated, and that's when somebody does something wrong, and in order to go through the penitential process, they have to bring a korban. But you know what? Vayikra says the Mikdash Halevi doesn't begin with a korban chayva, nor does it begin with a korban tzibur. It begins with a korban nedova, right? Odom ki yakriv, somebody who wants to bring a korban. Elodafka bekorban nedova shel yochid, the individual korban that is brought by somebody who decides that that's what they want to do. They want to offer up a gift, a korban, a sacrifice to Hashem. V'lich'oira, says the Mikdash Halevi, on the face of it, matam hadovar, how do we explain this? What is the reason for this? V'nir eloima. Why would it be that the book, and let's just deal with a portion, the Parsha, that deals with korbanos, that introduces the idea of the laws of sacrifices, would begin with a voluntary sacrifice and doesn't begin with a mandated sacrifice, whether it be individual or collective? The Nira Eloima, says the Mikdash Halevi, it appears to me that we can say, Shekasha mevi odam korban chayva kechatos osham. When a person brings a chatos, which is one type of sin offering, or an osham, which is another type of sin offering, v'kein kasher hatzibur mevim es korban osehem, or when a community, a congregation, offers up its sacrifices, harei sheloi oimedes bifneim kol bereira acheres. The fact is that they have no other, alternative when it comes to bringing these korbanos. These are mandated in terms of what needs to happen, and they bring up the korban. They could do it, they could bring the nicest korban possible. Nevertheless, this is something that they have to do. It's very possible to speculate, to consider the idea that had they had free choice in this, they might have decided not to bring that korban. They might have said to themselves, you know what, I don't really want to bring this korban today, I'm not feeling in the mood. The duty that they have as Jews is that they have no choice. They are duty bound to bring these korbanos. That's what they need to do. That's what is expected of them, and that's in the end what they end up doing. But if you look on the other side of the coin, the flip side, kasha odom maybe korban nedova mizmasai umirtsoina hachofshi. When somebody brings, he's feeling, you know what, he wakes up in the morning, he says, thank you Hashem, I'm so happy Hashem with what you've done for me. I would like to bring of my own free will, no one's demanding it of me, I would like to bring a korban. Harei shebekach hu meid al atzmai. In this way, it is self-evident. He is, as it were, a living example of the fact. He's got no doubt that he'd love to do mitzvahs. He's totally committed to the cause. He wants to be a person of faith, and that's why he's willing to give a korban even when he doesn't have to. It's not something that he's doing out of a sense of duty. He wants to do even more. He's expected to do one thing, he wants to do more. He's expected to do two things, he wants to do three, he wants to do four, whatever it is. He is not simply satisfied with that which he is mandated to do. He would like to do a little bit extra. He wants to go the extra mile. Therefore, and that's the reason, says the Mikdash Halevi, that is why in Parshat Vayikra, which deals introduces the concept of karbonos to the Jewish nation. The very first carbon that is used for this introduction is a carbon adova, is a carbon that one brings out of a sense of, I want to do it. Not because I have to do it, I want to do it. Karbonos ha'chayva v'karbonos ha'tzibur. By the way, Vayikra deals with both karbonos chayva, duty bound, the things that you need to do in terms of karbonos, and also karbonos hatzibur, which are also duty bound. It may not be individually something that you need to do, but you need to participate in the carbon tzibur whether you want to or not. Bichdei lelamed ki tzuras hakarban hara'uya v'haratzuya hinu zu asher ba'a lidei bitui b'karban nadava. It's to teach you an important lesson about the way you should be bringing a carbon. How do we do mitzvahs? What is our commitment when it comes to doing mitzvahs? Do we do it out of a sense of duty? I wake up in the morning, I have to go to davening now. I have to put on tefillin. I have to eat kosher. I have to do this. I have to do that. Do I want to do it? I don't really want to do it, but I'm going to do it because Hashem demands it of me. Is that the way you do a mitzvah? Says Vayikra talking about, and here you have a comparable, because you can bring a carbon which is an adova, and you can bring a carbon which is a carbon which is a chayv, or a carbon tzibur. Both of them are the same carbon, it's the same cow, it's the same sheep, it's the same carbon mincha. Nevertheless, they are different in terms of your particular obligation in terms of what they are. A carbon adova you don't have to bring. If you never brought a carbon adova in your life, no one is going to hold it against you. Nevertheless, it says something about you if you want to bring a carbon adova. However, there's something more here. The fact that Parshat Vayikra begins with a carbon adova is there to teach you that even when you bring a carbon tzibur or a carbon chayv, you need to do it in the same way as you would do a carbon adova. The attitude, the feelings that you have toward this particular carbon has to be identical. It shouldn't be different. And Parshat Vayikra, Sefer Vayikra, begins with a carbon adova, a voluntary, totally unmandated carbon, to say that this is the type of attitude that you should have towards all karbonos. Kalaymar, HaKadosh Baruch Hu mitzapeh me'itanu lahavi es kol karbonos kulam besimcha uveratzain. Hashem wants from us that we bring every carbon that we bring, anything that we do for Him, that we do it besimcha uveratzain, with joy and because we want to do it. Lo rak bichdei lotzeis yedei chayva, not just because we want to discharge our duty. Elo bichdei lahoisif oid v'oid ba'avodas Hashem, but because we want to increase and ever increase and increase even more in our service of God. V'lasais nachas ruach lefonov yisparach, and to bring Him joy and pleasure in everything that we do. We desire to do the right thing for Hashem, and that's why Parshat Vayikra and Sefer Vayikra begins with Daber el b'nei Yisrael v'amart aleim Adam ki yakriv mikem karban Hashem, a carbon adova. That's the reason why Vayikra begins in this way. Continues Mikdash Halevi, Daber el b'nei Yisrael v'amart aleim Adam ki yakriv, the same pasuk, al muhusam shel hakarbonos. Let's examine the ideas, the philosophical, theological ideas that are suggested when it comes to bring karbonos. It's a troubling thing for us because we don't bring karbonos today, and we can't ever imagine that we would offer up animals for the sake of Hashem, and that's something that we would do. In other words, I'm not suggesting I told you, I'm not stepping into that debate. But the idea of bringing karbonos is so foreign to us. We don't live in cultures where karbonos are normal, where karbonos are ordinary, where karbonos are things that happen on a daily basis. Whereas thousands of years ago, karbonos sacrifices, animal sacrifice was perfectly normal. It was an ordinary aspect of human life. So the different opinions regarding karbonos, and here we're going to see two opposing views, one by the Rambam and one by the Ramban. I've spoken previously I've actually addressed this in a shir that I've given in the past. You can check it out on my website, and I've dealt with this aspect of the friction between the Rambam and the Ramban about bringing korbanos and why we do it. But here, the Mikdash Halevi just briefly summarizes the two different opinions as represented by the Rambam and the Ramban. Why is it that we bring korbanos? What is it that we're meant to feel towards them? How are we meant to conceptualize korbanos in the Jewish faith? Our rabbis have offered us lengthy explanations for what it is that we do in terms of bringing korbanos. Mehem hasovrim, they're among those who believe, and that's here he's going to quote the Rambam, Ki in yonom shel korbanos heinu lahafkin es kefirosenu be'elilei ha'amim. That the reason why we bring korbanos, this is what the Rambam says, is to somehow subjugate, to deaden, to dull the feelings that we may have in terms of the heretical beliefs that exist be'elilei ha'amim, in the foreign gods, the pagan gods of the nations. There was in existence at the time that the Torah was given pagan gods, and to those gods were brought sacrifices. That was perfectly normal. That was the culture of the time, that you brought korbanos to your God. And as a way of somehow embracing that culture, but doing so in a legitimate fashion, the idea of korbanos was introduced to the Jewish people. And they did it, Batsoin uvabokar lohem sogdu amei kedem. They did it with sheep and with cows, because those were the animals that the ancient cultures worshipped. Umehem soivrim ki mataras hakarbonos lelamdeinu anova ulavienu letshuva. But there's another opinion. There are among our rabbis, and this is the opinion of the Ramban, that the reason for korban, he rejects what the Rambam says completely. He says the reason for korbanos is to introduce into the Jewish nation the concept of humility and to bring us to a point of doing teshuvah. Not that we're doing it as somehow in an apologetic fashion, because we'd like to bring korbanos to pagan gods, but we don't have pagan gods, so at the very least, we can bring korbanos to Hashem. That's what the Rambam suggests in Moreh Nevuchim. The Rambam rejects that idea completely. He says, no, the idea of a korban is to bring us to a point of doing teshuvah. Kasher niten el libeinu lehovin ki kasher naaser lekorbanenu. Because in our hearts we have to feel that whatever it is that gets done to the actual korban is a living, breathing animal. That's what a cow is, that's what a sheep is, that's what a bird is that you bring for the korbanos. And you see that animal, and what you're doing to it, it's getting killed. And in a sense, it is a parallel to you, because you too are a mammal. You too could die. You too have a fragile life. And you can see that when it gets done to your korban. We could think to ourselves, you know what, that which is done to the cow or the sheep or the chicken, that could quite easily have been done to us. That could have been our end result. And therefore, you put yourself in that space, and that will be ma'orer you to teshuvah. You'll do teshuvah as a result. Ella sha'yoysheh b'shamayim richam, because he who sits in heaven, as it were, is merciful. He doesn't want it to happen to us because we did an Aveira. He wants us to bring a korban, and somehow that will act as a penitential replacement for the korban that we should be, because we're not perfect. V'hinei. So the Mikdash Halevi is going to lean in one direction. There is a proof for this second opinion. In terms, we had the Rambam says that animal sacrifices, because that's what was prevalent at the time that the Torah was given at Mount Sinai and continuing on for hundreds, thousands of years. And there's the opinion of the Ramban that says it's totally independent of anything that may have existed at the time, and it's something that speaks to our souls, because when we see an animal being killed, and we know that it's being killed because of something that we have done, or because it's something that we want to contribute to Hashem, we know that that is in our place. The only modern day counterpart that I can think of is for those who have the custom on Erev Yom Kippur to do kaporos with a chicken. That we say that this chicken should be, as it were, a replacement in terms of the fact that it's going to die for whatever punishment that we were going to receive over Yom Kippur if we don't do teshuvah. So we have this sense, we have this idea that a living, breathing creature, that's what the Ramban wants to convey to us, a living animal is somehow to act as a replacement for us, and therefore we are sensitive to the fact that we are vulnerable, that we are weak, and that we are fragile. And we have a proof to this. We can find it in Tehillim, and it's in Perek Nun Aleph, the 51st chapter of Tehillim, and it's Pasuk Yud Zayin to Chof Aleph. Hashem svasai tiftoch ufi yagid telosecho, says the Pasuk. Hashem, open my lips, and let my mouth declare your praise. Ki lo isach poit zevach, va'eteina oila lo isirtza. You do not want me to bring sacrifices. You do not need burnt offerings. In other words, Hashem has no desire for korbanos. That's what David HaMelech is saying. We want to do that. We want to bring those korbanos. Zivche Elokim ruach nishbara leiv nishbar v'nidke Elokim lo sivzeh. True sacrifice to Hashem, says Tehillim, is a contrite spirit. Ruach nishbara. Leiv nishbar v'nidke Elokim lo sivzeh. You will, Hashem, you won't despise a contrite and a crushed heart. Heitiva birtzoincha es Tzion. The Pasuk in Tehillim says, may it please you to make Zion, Yerushalayim, prosper, and to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. Oz tachpoit zivchei tzedek, oila v'cholil, oz ya'alu al mizbacha choparim. Then you will want sacrifices offered in righteousness, burnt and whole offerings, and then bulls will be offered on your mizbeach, on your altar. Says the Mikdash Halevi, Shekenes Dvorav Shel David HaMelech Nire Levar Ba'ofen Zeh. We can explain what David HaMelech meant in this way. David HaMelech Maktim Letfilosai Es HaPosuk. How does David HaMelech in Tehillim introduce the ideas that we're about to discuss? Hashem Sefosai Tiftoch Ofi Yagid Tehilosecha. He says Hashem should open up my lips and my mouth should declare your praise. Umazbir ki mevakesh hu sheyiftach Hashem sfosov ve'yafsher lo lahagid tihlase befiv. What is it that we want most? We would like to have the ability, we would like to be able to communicate our love, our devotion, our loyalty, our praise of God with the mouth that Hashem has given us, and the ability that we have to express ourselves via that mouth. Ki lo isach poit zebach va'etena oila lo sirtze. Kloimar, what does it mean? Me'achar v'chayoim ein onu yicholim lahavi karbonaisenu lefonav yizbarach. Right now, we're not able, says David HaMelech. By the way, I'm not sure that in his time that this was true, but he's offering it as a prophecy for the future. When we read Tehillim, we live in a time where it's not possible for us to bring karbonos. Al-kei mevakesh David HaMelech shetiskabel tfilosei b'mokem korban umincha. Says David HaMelech, we should have the opportunity to be able to bring a korban that can replace. Somehow we have a korban, it's called Hashem's Sfosai Tiftoch. We have a korban through tefillah, through davening, that can replace the actual physical korbanos that were brought on the Mizbeach. This, by the way, is a famous Chazal. Chazal saying it's a Medrash Rabbah. Kechui mochem dvarim v'shur al Hashem. It's a pasuk in Hosea that ends u'neshalma porim sefosenu. Somehow the cows of the Mizbeach that you bring as a korban are replaced, or there is some type of correlation between the korban and the tefillah that we utter, the prayers that we say. Says says Vayikra Rabbah. It's a medrash. Rav Acha b'shem Rav Chanina bar Papa. Rav Acha said in the name of Rav Chanina bar Papa, Shelo yiu Yisrael oimrim, the Jewish people should never say, L'she'ovar hoyinu makrivin karbonos misaskim bohem. In the past, we used to bring karbonos and we were busy with doing karbonos. But what are we going to do now? Now we can't bring karbonos. By the way, in the time of Rav Acha and Rav Chanina bar Papa, there was no such thing as karbonos anymore. The Beis Hamikdash had been destroyed. What do Chazal teach us? Now that we don't have karbonos, what is it that we're meant to do? This pasuk in Hosea gives us the hint. It gives us the grounding to have a replacement, something that can represent karbonos even in an era, even in an age where karbonos cannot be brought. Omar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, says God, Hoyil v'atem misaskim bohem. Seeing as you are involved with them. How? By saying the karbonos. By the way, you say karbonos every day. I remember there was a rabbi in Gateshead. I learned at Gateshead Yeshiva. He was the head of the seminary. I used to go and hear a shir from him every Shabbos afternoon. And I remember he once said that the first thing that people tend to do when they come late to davening is sacrifice the karbonos. Crazy. You shouldn't miss out the karbonos. You have to say the karbonos. Do you know why? Because the karbonos that you say is a replacement for the karbonos that you can't bring. All the karbonos that we say in the morning between the end of Birkas HaShachar and the beginning of Pesukei de Zimra are our opportunity to replace that which we cannot bring in physical terms, but at least we can express it. We can be misasek, as the Medrash says in karbonos, Male ani aleichem ki'ilu atem makriven oisam. By saying the karbonos, says this Medrash, this is what Rav Acha said b'shem Rav Chanina bar Papa, that we have the opportunity by uttering the words, by saying the words that describe and define the karbonos, we have the opportunity to do something that it is as if we have brought the karbonos. Continues the Mikdash Halevi. V'oid moisiv David HaMelech u'mavher. David HaMelech adds something so that those psukim in Kapitel Nun Aleph of Tehillim continue. Ki kayoim zivche elokim ruach nishbara leib nishbar v'nidke elokim lo yisavazeh. So the idea is that true sacrifice of Hashem is a contrite spirit. It's only if you have a broken heart that the sacrifice will work. That's what the pasuk means. Koloima me'acha umatorosom shel hakarbonos hino lahavi es ha'odom lidei anova. What is the purpose of a carbon? That's what the Ramban says. The Ramban says the whole idea behind karbonos is so that we should feel humbled, that we should see some sense of comparison between us. Baruch Hashem, we end up, when we bring a carbon, we're still alive, but the carbon is dead. But between us and the carbon dies, and we look at this live animal that a few moments ago was alive and now is dead, and we say, that could have been us. So it makes us humble. It brings us down. We have some sense of our own mortality as a result of seeing that carbon bought, and that will make us humble. Hare Shemisha Liboy Shovur V'Nidke, says the Mikdash Halevi, that he who has a broken heart as a result of this idea that we are fragile, our lives are fragile, Rotzui hu lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu ki'ilu hevi carbon. That person, if you daven, and you daven with a broken heart, you daven with the sense that you are not worthy of what it is that Hashem wants from you. Not because you're not trying, and of course you're worthy in many senses, but you could be doing so much more. You have that humility in the face of Hashem. That is the purpose of karbonos, and that can be something that will be done, as the pasuk says on a shalma parim sefasenu, through the words that come out of our mouths. That is something that we can achieve through davening, that we can lahavi es ha'odam lidei anova. It will bring a person to a sense of their own, I guess, humility is one way of describing it, but unworthiness, that we're not really worthy, and we have a sense of our own fragility. Minayin shematoras How do we actually know that that's the purpose of karbonos? How do we know that it's the Ramban's interpretation that is correct, but not the Rambam's interpretation, that the reason we bring karbonos is only so that we can do away with the Yetzer Hara that we may have to bring karbonos to Avodah Zarah. So at least we have a kind of a consolation prize. We'd love to bring karbonos. Those pagan religions bring karbonos. We can't bring karbonos, so we're going to be upset. We're going to want to bring karbonos, so we're going to bring karbonos to Avodah Zarah. So, says the Rambam, at least we had this idea of karbonos, this duty to bring karbonos, so that we could be weaned off bringing karbonos to Avodah Zarah. How do we know that that's not the correct interpretation? That's what the Mikdash Halevi asks. How do we know that the Ramban has it right? That the reason for karbonos is lahavi es adam lidei nova, es zois meichiach David HaMelech behemshech dvarav, and that we can see from the way David HaMelech continues with the psukim here. At the time that Yerushalayim will be rebuilt, that what's going to happen? Oz tachpoitz zivchei tzedek oila v'cholil oz yalu amizbachacha parim. What you're going to do then? You're going to bring karbonos. Nah, that can't be. Because, come on, let's think about it. Kloima me'achar u'la'osid love. The end of time. In this moment when Mashiach comes in the Messianic era, the walls of Jerusalem will be rebuilt. Let's be honest. There's no such thing as Avodah Zarah today to which people bring karbonos. I mean, there may be isolated examples of it in the world, but broadly speaking, in the culture of the human race, anywhere you look in the world, in any continent, in any country, there's no such thing as a religion that demands that we bring, or that human beings bring karbanot, bring sacrifices on an altar and kill animals for the sake of whatever pagan god is being worshipped. There's no such thing anymore. That idea has been destroyed. It's been obliterated. Karaisi kareisun. Yachbaitz Hashem ba'olav aparim, and nevertheless, Hashem, that's what it says. That's what David HaMelech is saying in Perek Nun Aleph of Tehillim, that Hashem wants the offerings of the Jewish people. He wants the oilah, he wants the cows to be brought as karbonos on the Mizbeach Harei. Shemikach yeshna haichacha, we have a proof, berura, absolutely certain. Shematoras hakarbonos hina b'chdei lahavies hamakriv lidei shiflus uteshuva. That the whole purpose of bringing a carbon is to bring us down, as it were, to give us a sense of who we really are in the face of God. When we face of God, we could be very special in terms of the human race. We could be very special because we're people of faith, but when we're faced with God, what are we? We have to be humble. We have to recognize that we have severe limitations. How do we have that sense? When would we ever get that sense? If we bring a carbon, that carbon gets killed before it's brought up on the Mizbeach, and we see ourselves in that carbon because we too are mammals, we too have life. We were breathing and we are breathing, they were breathing, no longer breathing, and because they've been sacrificed, we have that sense of cross-identification with the mammal, with the cow or the bird that gets killed, and that will bring in us a sense of humility of what it is we need to do in the service of Hashem. Shekain ilu haisa matar b'chdei levates ivud ha'elilum. If the whole purpose of bringing karbonos was simply because it's a way of getting rid of any desire that we might have in terms of serving idols. Do you want to serve idols? Anybody who's watching this YouTube or is listening to this SoundCloud, are you interested in being a pagan worshipper? I don't think so. I'm not aware of it. And nobody has ever come to me in all my years being a rabbi and said to me, you know what? I would like to serve a pagan god. No one's ever said that to me. So if that's the purpose for bringing karbonos, there would be no purpose in bringing karbonos once Mashiach comes, because there's nobody in the world that brings karbonos anymore. But that's not what David HaMelech says. He says, Oz tachboit zivchei tzedek, oila v'cholil, oz yalu al mizbachecha parim. David HaMelech is very clear that when Mashiach comes, we are going to bring karbonos. Le'hoi sabah kol te'eles le'osid lovai kasha alilim k'vayach yachlefu yichalfu min ha'olam belav hochi. There would be no purpose in bringing karbonos if the whole purpose was to somehow act as a counterpoint to Ovdei Avodah Zarah. That wouldn't make any sense. The fact that David HaMelech is prophesying here that we're going to bring karbonos at the time when the Beis HaMikdash is built, rebuilt, le'osid lovai, that means the purpose of karbonos is to bring about in us a sense of humility. Let's look now at the next piece in the Mikdash Halevi. Daber el b'nei Yisrael v'amarta aleim Odom ki yakrid mikem korban l'Hashem. Same pasuk again. The Shulchan Aruch, that's what the Mikdash Halevi quotes here, quotes the Shulchan Aruch in Orach Chaim Siman Tzadiches Siman Daled. Hatefillah hi b'mokim hakorban. We already said this. The pasuk says in Hosea, "Unashalma parim sfasenu," and we know that tefillah, specifically Shemona Esrei, it's not just the karbonos that we say in between Birkas HaShachar and Psukei de Zimra. Actually, tefillah, the whole concept of prayer, is something that's there. It's a Gemara in Brachos. There's a machlokas there as to why tefillah was established. It's not really a machlokas. There's two different opinions, that Shachris Mincha Mariv is Avraham, Yitzchak and Yaakov, and the other opinion there is that it's about the Korban Tomid of Boker and Korban Tomid of the afternoon, and then the Hektar Chalovim that took place in the night, that's the reason we daven Shemona Esrei, and that's really, I have to tell you, that lahalocha, that's the way we paskin, that the reason why we daven Shachris Mincha and Mariv is in correlation to the times and to the concepts behind bringing the karbonos, and that's what the Shulchan Aruch is saying here. Hatfilah hi b'mokem hakarban. The reason we daven Shemona Esrei, the reason we have tefillah, we have prayer, is in place, is to replace the karbonos that we no longer bring. V'lakach tzorich li zoher shetehei dugmas hakarban b'chavona v'lo yarei ba machshava acheres. Says the Shulchan Aruch that the way we daven should be very similar to the way we would have brought karbonos. How did we bring karbonos? You need to have brought karbonos totally focused on the carbon that you're bringing. You can't be distracted. No, because then the carbon becomes pigul. You can't do that. You have to be totally focused. You can't have any kind of other machshava when you're bringing a carbon. Kamoi machshava shepaiseles bekodshim. You can't have the type of machshava that is going to invalidate a carbon that you're bringing in the Beis HaMikdash. Umad. You have to daven Shemona Esrei standing up. Why? Dumya da'avoida. In the same way as the service in the Beis HaMikdash had to be done standing up, you too have to stand up. Ukfiyus mokoim. You have to do it in a specific place. Another Gemara in Brachos. You're not allowed to daven in different places. You can't daven somewhere else every single day. Some people say even in the shul that you daven, you should have a specific place that you daven every day. But for sure, you have to choose your kahila, your community, your minyan that you daven on a regular basis. In the same way, says the Shulchan Aruch, that you've got a kfiyas makayim. When you bring a carbon, you can't bring a carbon wherever you want. It has to be in a specific place. Shekol echad kavua mekoima lishchitasei umatan domai. Because in every carbon there's a specific way of doing it and specific place and how it must be done. That is the concept behind karbonos that is also applied to davening as well. V'shelo yachutz davar beino lekir. There should nothing be between you and the wall. In other words, the front of the shul, it shouldn't be in some way obscured from you. You shouldn't be davening in a place that's behind the shul, not in the shul. You have to daven in the room that is the shul, because in the same way as when you brought a carbon, that was the case. Dumya de carbon, shachatzitza paiseles beinoi lakir. That's the same halacha applies when it comes to karbonos. You can't have any chatzitza, a separation between you and the wall. And in fact, it would be most suitable that when you daven, you must wear proper, fine clothes. Why? Kagoin bigdei kahuna. Because you've become a kohen. Why? Because it says in Neshama Parim that this idea of Neshama Parim Sfasenu, the idea of tefillah being correlated, being compared, being the same as korbanos, means you, if you are davening Shemoneh Esrei, become like a kohen. You become like a priest, or a priest had to wear special clothes. So when you go to daven, you can't just wear any clothes. You can't just go in your pajamas to daven. You have to dress properly. I'm being as generous as I can, but actually when you daven, there's a way of going to shul. You can't just go in flip-flops and shorts to shul. You have to look suitable. You have to, because you have to be in bigdei kahuna. The truth is, not everybody can afford to have the most beautiful clothes every time they go to shul, because not everybody can afford the most wonderful clothes. And we call Mokaim Toiv Hu Sheyulai Mechmasayim Miyuchodim Litfila Mishum Nekiyos. Says the Shulchan Aruch, at the very least you should have proper trousers, proper pants that you're going to wear, that cover you properly, that you're going to be appropriately dressed when you go to shul. You can't just come in a pair of swimming trunks to shul. That's not appropriate at all. You have to daven in shul appropriately dressed, which is of course why when you come to shul, one of the things that we do is we wear a talus. Why do we wear a talus? You don't wear a talus at home. You may wear a talus cotton, but the reason we wear a talus is because the talus is a proper item of clothing. It somehow conveys that you're in a special place, and that's an appropriate thing to do when you are davening in shul, because davening is the same as a korban, the same as bringing as a korban. That's what the Shulchan Aruch says, as quoted here in the Mikdash Halevi. Hine, ba'avudraham motzinu shekosav. In the Avudraham, which is one of the earliest Sidurim that we have, the text of the Siddur says, and this is in the Avudraham on Shachris Shel Choil, on the morning service that we have for the weekday. This piece appears Achar Tfilas Ein Kelokenu. At the end of the davening, we have Ein Kelokenu, which is a particular prayer that we say that there's no one like Hashem. V'da, says the Avudraham, you should know. Ki shliach tzibur hu ata bizman hazeh b'mekoim hakoyin hamakriv bizman habayis. You must know that if you are a chazan, if you are a bal tefillah, you're a shliach tzibur, you are like the kohen who brought a korban in the Beis HaMikdash. Now that has to be the sense that you have if you get up in front of the Omid to lead the kahal, to lead the congregation. Pashut eifoi ki achrayus hamuteles al shliach hatzibur keveido ad lemoed. It's absolutely clear, says the Mikdash Halevi, that the duty that falls upon the shliach tzibur is extremely heavy. Keveido ad lemoed. Is something that you have to take that into consideration. Somebody asks you, would you like to be a chazan for mincha? And you say yes, you say no. Do you ever think about the fact that if you are the chazan for shachris or mincha or mariv, that you're like a kohen? You are like a priest in the Beis HaMikdash. Why? Because you become the person who represents the kahal to bring the korban, because we've said, unashalma parim sefasenu, that the words that come out of our lips is somehow correlated to the parim that we bring in the Beis HaMikdash, and you're the chazan. You're not just a person in the congregation, in the minyan, you're the chazan. The ein lahokel barosh klal uchlal. You can't be lenient about this at all. You have to have this sense that when you're the chazan, you have a super duty. Hu loy rak chazan. This person who's the shliach tzibur is not just a chazan. He's not just the person who's going to get up and say it out loud. Elo shlicham shel kol hatzibur kashem shakoyin haya shlicham shel kol Yisrael. He is the emissary. He is the shaliach of the congregation, just like the kohen was the shliach of everybody for whom korbanos were brought. He He had to bring the karbonos according to the will of Hashem on the Mizbeach. That was the duty. That was the job of the Kohen. That's what he had to do. Oh, you're a chazan, you're a Kohen. You're bringing karbonos on the Mizbeach. It's not simple. Me'ato kashem sha'kohen ha'makriv al gabei mizbeach mechuyev hoiles rakeiz b'kavanosei l'shem shamayim. Let's think about it. What did the Kohen have to do? Oh, he had to be totally devoted, dedicated. His mind had to be totally clear. Couldn't be distracted by anything. He had to make sure that everything he was doing was 100% l'shem ha'korban. Otherwise, the korban is going to be possible, and he will have failed those who sent him to do the thing that he's about to do. That's what a chazan has to do. You can't have any distractions. She'im loy kain alula hoisa machsheves hapigul lifseis sakorban. It's defective. Alula. If you bring a korban and you're thinking about what am I going to eat for dinner, or have I arranged yet to go out with my friends because I want to do something tonight? If that's what you're thinking when you're bringing a korban, the korban is pigul, it's no good. It's alula, it's defective. And that's a chazan as well. You're chazan, and you're thinking to yourself, oh, well, how long is it taking? What is that person? I can see that person's looking at his phone. I wonder what he can see. And you're thinking about everything else except for what you're meant to be doing, which is to be the chazan, the shliach tzibur, the bal tefillah for the people who are in your minyan, who are in your congregation. Kach mechuyev shliach hatzibur lerakez es kol kavanosei b'tfilosoi amanos sheloi lefagel es tfilas hatzibur chalila. He must focus totally and completely. He must be entirely concentrated on the tefillah that he is doing on behalf of the congregation, so that he doesn't turn it into something which is possible, a korban which is possible for the congregation. Chalila. That would be a terrible thing. V'omnom, hachazan mechuna bal tefillah. Let's think about it. What do we call a chazan? I've said it a few times. He's called a Baal Tefillah. What does the word Baal mean? Lelamdenu ki tzarichu liyos Baal madrega b'tefillah. He doesn't. Baal means you're in control. Baal means you're in charge. Baal means you are somehow superior over something because it's your thing. You have to be a Baal Tefillah. You have to be a Baal madrega. You have to have elevated yourself to be worthy of being the Baal Tefillah, of being the Chazan. Keshem sheBaal Chesed hinu mishahu bar ma'ala bechesed. What is it that when somebody calls somebody a Baal Chesed, oh, he's a great Baal Chesed, he or she is a massive Baal Chesed, Balas Chesed, what does it mean? It means that they are the masters of Chesed, the masters of kindness, the masters of charity. That's what they are. They're a Baal or Balas Chesed. Kach bidiyuk gam ba'asher leBaal Tefillah. The exact same condition applies to somebody who is referred to in our rabbinic literature as a Baal Tefillah. He has to be a master of Tefillah, of prayer. Ein dai bekach sheyanim hachazan bekoila b'sefer hakatoim. It's not just enough that they read the last pasuk of every single thing. You know, the end of Ashrei. That's not enough. That's just reading. Anyone can read. That's not sufficient. Hu tzarich liyos Baal Tefillah la'orech kol hatefillah. He has to daven the whole davening, not just the last bits, and then skip through everything else, or read through it with his eyes, or sort of mumble or mutter through it. That's not a Baal Tefillah. Lispale la'at u'b'mesinus mila b'mila. He has to daven slowly and carefully every single word, with all his heart and with all his soul. And only then can such a person be worthy of being the leader, of being the person who can lead the tzibur, the congregation, and to bring along their tefillah in front of Hashem, in front of God, who listens to all prayer. Let's do one more piece of the Mikdash Halevi on Parshat Vayikra. Dabar al Bnei Yisrael Leimar. Says the pasuk. This is a pasuk later on, it says, Nefesh ki sechta bishkoga, mikol mitzvahs Hashem shaloi te'asena, v'asa me'achas mehena. This is a discussion about a korban that you need to bring when you do what's known in rabbinic literature as a shoygeg. It comes from the Torah. Do you know what a shoygeg is? A shoygeg is an accidental avera, but it's not an accident that was just happened by chance. It's an accident of, that you were negligent. Somehow you could have avoided that accident, but you didn't avoid that accident, and you ended up doing the avera. Now, could you be blamed for the avera? You didn't do it on purpose. No, you just did the avera. You did the avera, and it was a mistake, but you nevertheless have done it. Somehow it's contaminated you because that avera has been done. For example, you ate non-kosher food, non-kosher meat that wasn't shechted properly. And you could have checked whether you were eating the right meat or not the right meat, and you didn't check. It was an accident. You could say, but it's a negligent accident, because you could, or for example, somebody who makes a mistake on Shabbos, and it's not just a total accident, it's an actual negligent accident. He should have known it was Shabbos. He should have checked his calendar. He should have known that yesterday was Friday and tomorrow is going to be Sunday. He did a shoygeg. He has to bring a korban chatos. That's what he has to bring. He has to bring a specific type of sin offering called a korban chatos. Says the Medrash Tanchuma, quoted here in the Mikdash Halevi. Mahu bishkoga, lelamdecha shekol hachote bishkoga, ki'ilu oiver al mitzvahs Hashem. Says the Tanchuma a fascinating thing. Why is it that you have to bring a korban for a shoygeg? To teach you that someone who transgresses an avera b'shoygeg, as it were, in this negligent accident way, it's as if he has transgressed the mitzvahs of God. Interesting, says the Mikdash Halevi, mashmos divrei Chazal hino. What is the implication here of what Chazal are telling us in Medrash Tanchuma? Ki over avera b'shoygeg malo olav hakosav kilu over al kol mitzvahs Hashem. It sounds like it's saying that somebody who does a shoygeg, somebody who transgresses an avera somehow by accident, not quite a random accident, but the type of accident that could have been avoided, it sounds like they have been over all the mitzvahs of Hashem, that they've transgressed every mitzvah in the Torah. It's not just the chait that he had transgressed, that has been transgressed. Somehow there is an implication here that all the mitzvahs, all the averis in the Torah, anything that he shouldn't have done, he has done as a result of this shoygeg. This is unbelievable. Really? You did something by accident and now you're guilty of having transgressed every avera in the Torah? Shekain harei afilu achoyte b'mezid, says the Mikdash Halevi. Even somebody does something on purpose. Let's say you ate non-kosher meat on purpose, or you were mechalel Shabbos on purpose. Eino nitva elo al ois avera. The only reason you'll be held responsible is for the avera that you actually did. Mesuyemes shebochata. You will be held responsible for the specific sin that you sinned in that situation. How is it possible to understand this anomaly? That somebody who is transgressing an avera b'shoygeg is even worse, or is more culpable somehow, than somebody who transgresses an avera on purpose. Makes no sense whatsoever. Says the Mikdash Halevi Venira, it appears to me sheha'oiver avera b'mezid, that somebody who transgresses an avera, who does something wrong, who sins against Hashem on purpose, harei mashmos hadova hino shenichshal b'cheit mesuyam. The fact is, it's totally focused, it's concentrated on that specific sin. Me'acha v'le'omad le'koichai keneged ta'atuei Yitzray hara. He was in a situation, he keeps every other mitzvah in the Torah properly, but in this particular situation, he wasn't able to withstand what the Yetzer Hara was telling him to do. The Yetzer Hara was saying, do the Avera, do the Avera, do the Avera, do the Avera, and eventually he couldn't hold back and he did the Avera. But it's only that specific. There was no other Avera mentioned in this exchange that he was having with the Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Hara was kind of forcing him in that specific area. He could have withstood the Yetzer Hara. He didn't. He gave in and he did that specific Avera. Ad asher hitzliach hayetzer lahapiloi birishosei. The Yetzer Hara was able to ensnare him, was able to get him to do the Avera, because the Yetzer Hara, that's what the Yetzer Hara's purpose is, to get you to do Averas. And he was successful in that specific Avera. Me'ata, baru ki'ein lahashima ela b'chet zu zeh b'chata. You can't hold him responsible for any other Avera, because he only transgressed that particular sin. That's the only thing he did wrong. And that was the thing that the Yetzer Hara was working on. Evil inclination wants you to do something wrong, focuses on the thing where you're most vulnerable, looks for the weakest link, succeeds, and then you did that Avera, and that's what you did. But you can't be held responsible for anything else. There's no connection between this particular sin and any other sins that may exist in terms of the 613 mitzvahs. Yitochim behechlet she'ilu haya yitzray menase la'asiyah lechtoi b'chet acher. It's possible to say, in fact, it's very plausible to say, that had the Yetzer Hara wanted him to do any other Avera, lo yahaya oile hadova biyodai, he wouldn't have done it. No, he's not interested in that Avera. Let's say you're somebody who has a specific weakness when it comes to food, and the Yetzer Hara tells you should eat that treif. Doesn't it look delicious? That's what you should eat today. In the end, you give in to the Yetzer Hara and you eat the food that's not kosher. Does that mean you're not going to keep Shabbos? Of course not. You would never think about breaking Shabbos. You love keeping Shabbos. You love everything about Shabbos. You've never been a Machal Shabbos in your life. Or it could be the opposite. It could be somebody who has a tremendous weakness when it comes to Shabbos. But when it comes to eating kosher, they're 100% kosher. So one has nothing to do with the other. If you transgress one particular sin, it has no relationship with any other sin. Because the fact is, had the Yetzer Hara tried to get you to commit a particular sin but you have no interest in, you would just reject it. You would have your control over, you have self-control, you wouldn't do it. On the other hand, when somebody transgresses a sin, it's regarding a negligent accident. You can't say that was the Yetzer Hara's fault. You can't blame Soton. You can't blame any kind of influence in your life because it had nothing to do with that. It could be that you don't even know that it's also. You know that Rabbi Dunner and Eibeshit says that we could all be Machalei Shabbos. Do you know why? Because we don't know Hilchos Shabbos. Why don't we know Hilchos Shabbos? Because we don't learn Hilchos Shabbos. Every Shabbos comes along, we may be doing things that go against the laws of Shabbos, simply because we're not educated in those laws, in those halachos. And we're shoygegim. You probably have to bring a korban chatos every week, because we don't know what we're doing. It's not because we're deliberate. No, Yetzer Hara has no influence on us when it comes to that. We want to keep Shabbos, but we don't know Hilchos Shabbos. Says Rabbi Dunner and Eibeshit, we need to learn Hilchos Shabbos constantly to remind ourselves of what it is that is forbidden on Shabbos, that we never machal Shabbos, that we never desecrate the laws of Shabbos. There was actually no interaction that he had with his evil inclination where this could have resulted in going one way or the other. It has no relationship with that. Hamashmor shel hachet b'shoigeg, hachota b'shoigeg, hachote b'shoigeg, hinu lemaaseh ki hachote lo lamad es halachos hanechutzos. The reason why you are a chote b'shoigeg is because you never got to learn the halachos properly, and therefore you ended up doing it wrong. And somebody pointed out, "Excuse me, what you just did was chilul Shabbos." I did it b'shoigeg. You have to bring a korban chatos, but because you didn't know what you were doing. You never got into a fight with the Yetzer Hara. You just did it, and you did it wrong. Al kain. Therefore, says the Mikdash Halevi, kasha onu misyachsim al el oisei odom. when we're dealing with a specific individual, the person who did the Avera B'Shoigeg, Onu Misyachsim Elov Kamisha Ova Ala Kol HaTorah Kula. We have to consider that person to be like an individual who is a transgressor of every Avera possible that emerges from the Torah. Why? Kami she'alul la'aver al kol HaTorah kula. He's liable to do things which are wrong from the Torah because he doesn't know what he's doing, or she doesn't know what she's doing. It's not because it's deliberate. It's specifically because it's an accident or because it's by mistake that we know that that person could be doing it in every other Avera. When it comes to doing it deliberately, it's very specific to the sin that you do. The Yetzer Hara has an influence over you on the thing that you have a great weakness in. But when it comes to doing something b'shoigeg, it's nothing to do with weakness. The Yetzer Hara doesn't even engage with you because it doesn't know that you... But it's not something that ever comes about as a discussion. You just do it because you're doing it wrong. You could be doing everything wrong. Because if you don't know the laws, if you don't know the halachas, if you don't know what you're doing and how to do it correctly, and therefore you're not somebody who's constantly learning, who's constantly making sure that you're familiar with what it is that you need to do, lahalacha, who parutz lechalutim vein lo das heichon yikoshel oikva nichshal ba'avar. Be clear that if you are uneducated in halacha, the chances are that you are a oiver avera b'shoigeg. It's as simple as that. If you don't know what you're doing, you can be sure that you're doing something wrong. If you're educated and the Yetzer Hara imposes on you or manages to convince you to do something wrong, that's specific to that particular Avera. But if you are somebody who's an over Avera b'shoigeg, then you can be certain that there's other Averas you're doing b'shoigeg as well because you don't know what you're doing. V'omnam sibazu hayasha medes me'achri ha'hebdo b'gishoso shel haTorah ben ha'shoigeg lemezid. That's exactly the reason that there's this difference in the Torah between a shoigeg and a mezid, between an accidental, as it were, Avera and something that was done on purpose. Ha'choyte b'mezid mekabel onesh malkus. Somebody who does an Avera on purpose, he gets makos. Do you know what makos are? Makos are lashings. That they could get up to 39 lashes with some kind of whip, and that was one of the punishments that Beis Din could mete out for somebody who did an Avera, specifically if they did it b'mezid. Shekein lemase chatoi nigram beikfus his gabrus koiches haguf hanishlotim al yidei ha'yetzer hara. Do you know why? Because that very he did was because the guf somehow overwhelmed the spiritual side of him as a result of the influence of the Yetzer Hara. That's what happened here. That your guf took control, your body, your material side took control and wasn't able to withstand the pressure, because you should really do the mitzvah. You shouldn't be doing the Avera. But the reason you did the Avera was because your material couldn't withstand the pressure of the Yetzer Hara. We should have a Yetzer HaTov that can counteract the Yetzer Hara, but somehow that Yetzer HaTov was overwhelmed. In order to assist the spiritual side, the neshama side of who you are, against the physical, material side of human existence, yesh lahakos es haguf. We hit the guf. What's the guf? The guf, the body is representative of the material side of the human condition. So we hit the guf because it's a way of diminishing the material in order to elevate the spiritual. And to give it pain. Bichdei sheloi yoshuv oid lechisla. This is taken from a pasuk, that he should no longer return to his folly. But on the other hand, when somebody does something b'shoigeg, ein kol tam lahakoisa. There's no reason why that person should get makas. Why should that person get lashed? Makes no sense. Haloi chet oi loy hoyo mishum hagiboris haguf ala nefesh. It's not because the guf, the material, the physical, the body took precedence or was stronger than the soul, than the spiritual side. Let's be honest. The reason why most people do Averis is not because they want to be deliberately bad. It's because they're not educated in how to do good or to do the right thing or to do the right thing properly. That's why Averis get done. That's got nothing to do with makkos. Why would you get makkos for that? That's just a lack of education. That's something which can be corrected if you're educated, because if you know the right way of doing something, then you'll probably do the right thing. That's why somebody who sins b'shoigeg, this sort of half accident, not negligent accident, way of doing an avera, mitzvah haTorah lahavi korban lachapora al chatoi. The Torah says you have to bring a korban for that. Makkos isn't good enough. Makkos may be good for a mazid, but it's no good for a shoigeg. B'chdei she hakorban al kol hakoruch boy yo'ira oisel is boinanus yesera b'masov mikan ve'elach. Because when you bring the korban, you're forced to focus, you're forced to do teshuvah, you're forced to understand that you've done something wrong and what it is you've done wrong, and to hopefully repair that which is faulty in your system so that you never do wrong again. Al manas shelo yeshanet shuv matzav shel choset shumas leiv me'en zeh asher vi'u al mechuzos hachet milechatchila. The purpose of a korban is to ensure that you are going to be more thoughtful going forward, that you're not going to end up doing the Avera again because you realize you did something wrong. You bring the korban, you have this process. It's got nothing to do with the fact that you were influenced by the Yetzer Hara. It's got to do with the fact that you were negligent. It's got to do with the fact that you weren't on top of your game. And in order to achieve a new path in your life, you bring a korban that refocuses you, it re-energizes you, it makes sure that what you're doing is the correct thing, and going forward you will never commit the shoigeg again. We'll leave it here for today. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening.